we turn back to Jonah. If this is your first time, we're going to take a journey with Jonah, and we are going through every verse of this 4-chapter story and experience that Jonah had. Some of the times we're going to take little pieces of the story, sometimes larger chunks. And so we come back to the story. We're in the first chapter because we have just begun this journey. So you're coming in at a good time. So let me start by asking just a show of hands. Who has had in their life as a parent or grandparent or guardian a 2-year-old experience? Yeah, 2-year-old. Yep. Wow. Almost all the room. Yes. And though if you're online, if you have a 2-year-old, you probably missed the question because they're screaming in the background. And so many of us have had this experience. What is the favorite word of a 2-year-old? No, that is right. In fact, I brought a little information, a little research for those of us that think we're the only parents that are failing at that age. They're called the terrible twos. And here's what we find. The terrible twos characterized by defiant behavior, including saying no, hitting, kicking, biting, ignoring rules. I would add to that spitting, yelling, griping. It can start as early as just after the first birthday or may not set in until a child is 3 years old. And I would add to the research and continues for some until well into their adult age. I am a pastor. I've had experience, including Mr. Jonah. Jonah threw a 2-year-old tantrum and he said no to God. You remember that he said, God said, I want you to arise and go to Nineveh. And he said he went down to Joppa. And so it's an interesting little pattern. I don't think there's anything super theologically deep around it, but there's a lot of ups and downs here. God said, arise. He went down. He was on the boat. The seas were rising. He's down in the cockpit or whatever they call that thing on a boat. Yeah, I sell a lot. Yeah. So anyway, a lot of ups and downs. And so here's what we read in Jonah chapter 1, verse 3. But Jonah ran away from the Lord. It's a ridiculous impossibility. And he headed for the city of Tarshish, or the region, when he went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. He paid himself. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed to Tarshish to flee from the Lord. Now, it's interesting with a 2-year-old. You know how a child will put their hands over their eyes, and because they can't see you, they think you can't see them, right? And so when you look at how ridiculous this was for Jonah, he thought, well, God can't see me. I can actually run away and say no. When you look at the story, it makes no sense. I do believe that there are different flavors of no. Sometimes there's the nervous no. That was Moses. Like, I don't know I can do, I'm pretty sure I can't. I'm convinced I can't do what you've asked me to do. I'm nervous, and I'm going to say no because I'm nervous. And I think a lot of us would range in that. God's asked us to do something bigger than we think we can do. Instead of trusting in him, we just say no nervously. Then it ranges all the way up to this one, which is the nuclear no. That means I am absolutely no way. I don't care what happens, God. I'm going to run away from the nuclear no. And I would say that our inventory, if we took inventory of our no's across the years to God, it probably ranges from the nervous no to the absolutely not no. What are you thinking, God? Nuclear no. When you look at the map, people have asked me as we started this journey, where is Nineveh? Because that's where God had asked him to go. Where is Nineveh now? So I brought a picture. It's in Mosul in northern Iraq. And so that's where the picture is. But here's the bigger picture, and some of you already know this. If you look at the next map, you'll see Nineveh on the right and Tarshish on the left. I've put some mileage in here for us. It's about 2,500 miles. This is a 500, and so it's over 3,000 mile no. That's a nuclear no. It wasn't just like, well, I'll just skip town and go over, I'll go from Sarasota to Braden and, oh no, I'm going to Siberia. I'm going to get out of here. Although it does feel like Siberia outside right now. What this picture shows us, and by the way, this is longer than it is from east to west in the United States. So it'd be like living in Virginia. God asks you to go to North Carolina. Instead, you go to California. This is a screaming, don't even think about it, nuclear no. That's what that picture says. And so when you look at this story, it is so ridiculous because we are reminded in Psalm 139, verse 7, where can I flee? Where can I flee from your presence, God? What a ridiculous endeavor. So God wasn't going to be changed in this whole story. But I tell you, when you look at this question, because each week we've said, what if? What if we say no to God? What happens? I remind you, I brought this up last week. We planted this church on the what if question. And the thing that caused us to say, okay, let's do it, because this was not my training. I went to seminary, but it wasn't my specialty to plant a church. Like I said last week, some of you were like, makes total sense now. And so, but my wife and I looked at each other and we said, when we're 85 or 90 years old, how's it going to be? What if we said no to God? And we're going to look at each other and said, we're going to ask the question, what if we would have said yes? What would have happened? Doesn't matter how you might measure success or not of 360. It wasn't about that. It was about God said, go to Nineveh. God said, do this. And what would have happened to our own lives? What would have happened if we had lived the life of Jonah? What would happen? What happens in your life, my life, our lives, when we say, what if we say no to God? And I think the consequences are real and tangible, dangerous, unsettling, unnerving. That's where we land today. Here's why. There's not a person sitting here in this room. There's not a person sitting at home that has never said no to God. We've all said no to God. Sometimes it's a little nervous no, and sometimes it's like, oh, heck no, right? It ranges. Everybody says that. So I think it's important for us to begin to look at what happens. We begin in Jonah chapter 1, or continue in 1 verse 4. Watch this. What happens when we say no? Here's the first thing. Our lives, forget the mission for a second. Our lives are rocked. Our lives are unstable. Our lives become tossed back and forth. In Jonah 1:4, then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea. It just didn't happen that it went the wrong way. Shouldn't have gone to Tarshish because you didn't understand, all the wind patterns. No, God sent a wind, and it was a fierce wind. You might remember in Exodus chapter 14, this is how God split the Red Sea. Said he sent a wind, a mighty, powerful wind that actually was so powerful that it blew the sides of the water up to a wall, and they were able to walk through it. In Jeremiah chapter 10, we're reminded that God brings out of the storehouse, like almost the end of the book of Job, brings out of the storehouse winds for his purpose. You see, God's got a whole artillery of things to say, hey, wait a minute. So the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship was threatened to break up. Now, it's interesting here. When you look at this route that Jonah was going, he was going to Tarshish. And every time I say Tarshish, I feel like I'm saying it in a wrong way. But anyway, I just wanted to get that out because you don't think I'm slobbering up here. Every time when you look at Tarshish, Tarshish was a powerful a trade city. In fact, as you saw the map, it was in their minds the furthest point in their world. They didn't know that the world went past Tarshish. They didn't, because it was Spain as we know it, right? They didn't. That was in their Mediterranean thinking. He just didn't go to the next state. He went to the farthest. And what we read is in the scriptures, in the Psalms, we read it in Ezekiel, we read it in Isaiah, we read it in Jeremiah, the ships of Tarshish. The ships of Tarshish were these major cargo merchant ships. They were well built. They were strong. They were powerful. They were, well, really, the Titanic. You remember the Titanic, when it sailed, it was the maiden voyage of the Titanic. They built the Titanic to our currency today. It would cost $200 million to build the Titanic today. And when they launched the Titanic, it was such a big event that 100,000 people showed up to see it launch out into the ocean. That's how powerful it was. That was the reputation. The same thing for the ships of Tarshish. Why do I bring that up? You see, in his nuclear no, just like us, Jonah said, I'm going to go to a place that God can't touch. Sometimes it's the ships of our salaries. Sometimes it's the ships of our reputation or our position or whatever those things that we think is like, this is powerful. And it gives me the passport to say no, because I know I'll be safe in a ship of Tarshish. See? So he's like, oh, I'm feeling pretty confident about this run from God. And so what you find is that God comes back and says, no, here's actually the thing. No matter what your ship of safety, no matter what your ship of refuge, no matter where you think you're finding haven for me, God would say, I just want to remind you that I'm bigger. I am bigger than any ship. And I actually have a storeroom that's full of wind. I know a lot of people that are full of wind, but see, God, he's got a storeroom of wind. And it's more powerful than the most powerful ships of that day with great reputation. Watch this, Isaiah chapter 2. I kind of scooched the words over because I want you to look at the words all and every that address the greatness of God, that nothing is bigger than God. Watch this. For the Lord of hosts has a day against all that is proud and lofty, against all that is lifted up, it shall be brought down. This is the exact language that he uses in the same book to his adversary, Lucifer. He said, you will be brought low. You'll be brought down low. Against all the cedars of Lebanon, lofty and lifted up. The cedars of Lebanon were known as the king of trees. Above all other trees, they grow as tall as 120 feet. And then he said, against all the oaks of Bashan, which are low and squatty, they represented a refuge and community. Sometimes they would grow long and people would come to refuge. So whether your tree is tall and gives you power and strength, or whether your tree is squatty and gives you refuge, God says, I'm bigger than all of that. Against all the lofty mountains, against all the uplifted hills, against every high tower. God is against every fortified wall. And watch, against all the ships of Tarshish, all of your refuge, against all the beautiful craft. Here's what God is saying. I am bigger. You can't hide anyway, because I got this GPS thing going on that you can't hide. But wherever you hide, it's not safe from running from God. I know exactly where you are. And verse 3 of the story, I got to tell you, it feels so good. There are moments in my life I've said no to God, and in the moment, it does not feel crummy. I'm just being honest. It feels good. I paid my fare. I got on the boat and it's sailing, and I think God is back there and all is going well. The wind is in my sails. Everything. I'm in Tarshish, the ship of Tarshish. I'm feeling good. I'm like, woo, I got out of that one. And then here comes the wind. I'll never forget. Literally, there are not many things I remember as clearly as I remember the first day of of being 16 years old. I got my license, and I felt so liberated. And my mom went down to the DMV with me. We got that, license. And I was on the way home, I'm like, man, I'm going to drop mom off and I'm going to drive. Where are you going to drive? It don't matter. I'm just going to drive. It was raining a little bit that day. We had a driveway with a wall that started about a foot high and then went up about 5 feet high. My mom said, hey, let me help you park it. Are you talking to me? See, I've been under your regime for 16 years, but today is a day of liberation, 4th of July. So I'm like, I wasn't even planning on parking, but I'm parking now. And I backed that car up, and I heard a little... See, I had never experienced a... So I didn't really know how to respond. I accelerated. And that... something like that. And I got that car so jacked up on that wall, I couldn't get it off. I came in, I slammed the door. My mom, everything okay? Yeah. Liberation is not always as joyful as you think it's going to be. Here's the thing. When we say no to God, it is often internally, eventually, maybe not in that moment, but eventually, we feel so unstable. And the thing that we put our anchor towards, God said, no, that's not your refuge. That's not your tower. That's not your strength. That is not your stability. And when we think we just like, hey, we're free and clear, it's not that. Listen, sometimes when we read this story, we think God was really angry with Jonah. Try this one on. What if the winds of the storm were winds of compassion? What do I mean by that? You're a parent. If you're a parent, you want your kids to feel unstable? You want your kids to be torn up inside? You want your kids to like, ugh, all the time? See, God, his compassion oozes out of this. This is not just a feel-good statement I'm making. God had compassion on the sailors. He could have just treated like the Titanic and everybody's going down. Jonah's going down, the sailors going down, everybody's going down. I gotta fix this so the sailors don't go down. Jonah jumps in the water. He could have said, well, I'll just, get somebody else. No, see, the fish, which some people would look at as a dilemma, was the lifeboat. Otherwise, he would have died. You see, his compassion is bleeding out. God could have written Nineveh off. You are an unreached, disobedient country, city, and I am done with you. But see, compassion comes out. Compassion comes out when Jonah is in the 4th chapter and he's scorched in the scorching heat. And God says, even though you said no to me so many times, I'm still going to grow a plant over you to shade you. The compassion of God oozes out. Why wouldn't it in the storm? Here's the thing. What if God's compassion, the intensity of God's compassion, is pictured in the intensity of the storm? You see, this is the father, the prodigal son. There's an intensity of the father saying, there he is, and he runs. This is the picture of our God. This is not a picture of our God because this might be the picture that you have of God. You know what? You disobeyed me and ticked off at you, and I don't like you as much as I liked you yesterday. Because some people have that image of God in their mind, that he just can't wait for you to slip up. Because that happens in our own life. You say one thing wrong. Somebody's on you. Somebody's on you. Somebody's on you. Perched. See, God is perched for compassion. God can't wait to bring you back to have that stability, to calm the storm in your life. Watch, St. Augustine said it this way: God has made us for himself, and our heart is restless until it rests in him. We say no to God, there's a storm inside. That's the first person that's impacted us. Here's the second thing. Have you ever been in a restaurant with a terrible two? You are not the only ones being impacted, right? You get the ugly looks, especially from people that never had kids before, right? We were those people before we had kids, like, just keep your kid quiet. I'm trying to eat my salad, and you give that. We were in Orlando once on vacation with one of our terrible twos, and we and the pastor, we went to this church, and we were guests, and it was a big church, and he was preaching on this word called Selah, which kind of means pause, rest, right? And he was in the psalm, and he was trying to be dramatic, and so he would be speaking along, and they would go, Selah. That was our cue for screaming. How did our 2-year-old know when he says Selah, you scream? Because it was like, Selah. After about the 7th Selah, over my shoulder, there was a styrofoam cup with little goldfish. And with this guy who was so friendly, he goes, we have an extra room in the back. That's what he said. And I said, Selah, let's get out. Watch this, Jonah 1:5. All the sailors were afraid. You see, Jonah affected those in the boat. His no rippled out to everyone else around them, and so does it for us. Don't think your no to God is just some internal private phone booth that nobody else is in. We live in boats. I live in a boat, you live in a boat. In other words, we live with people around us in close proximity. So when we're saying no to God, we're impacting other people. They were afraid. Not only that, they called out to other gods. Sailors, they came from all different countries. How do we know that? Because the sailors eventually in the next couple of sentences say, hey, Jonah, what country are you from? So we know that these sailors came from all different kinds of places and all different kinds of faiths. And that's why it says they cried out to his own God. All of a sudden, it was a pluralistic worship service. Everybody was just calling out to whoever his God was. You see, the men in that boat were like every human being, including us. God has created in us an appetite to seek him. There's an appetite for food that we have. And when we have food this afternoon, we can say, what are you going to eat? Pizza. Okay, I'm going to eat a burger. I'm going to eat kale. I'm going to eat whatever that thing is, right? We have an appetite, but then once we have an appetite, we choose what food we're going to have. And it's the same for our spiritual life. God has created in us an appetite, but we're going to choose what we think is going to satisfy that. So you may have come today, or you may be online, you think, yeah, that's me. I can't define it. That was my story. Suddenly I'm hungry. I've got this appetite for something beyond the things I can see. I didn't know how to define it. So I began to search at the buffet of religion. I began to research different religions, different spiritual moments. I went to Scientology when I lived in Boston. I'm like, hey, maybe this gets it done for me. And I lived across the street from the mother church of Christian Science. And so I'm like, hey, let me check this out. What do I know? All I know is I got an appetite. And when you're in the boat with someone who's saying no to God, they're going to be the last person to help guide you to the true God. You see, the impact was incredible. It wasn't just the ocean was coming up and down, but those men didn't know the true God. So what do? They cried out to whoever was at the buffet, to his God. You see the seriousness of the no to the people around us. We found out that Pew Research is telling us that 90% of Americans believe in, quote unquote, a higher power. 90%. That gives us a lot of hope. And that's true because, and I believe the other 10% will have a sense of that. Maybe they just don't want to confess that in their life right now. But every single human being, 90% of Americans confess that there is a higher power. But 33% of Americans say, I want nothing to do with the God of the Scripture, the true living God. You see, what we need is a Jonah in their boat who says yes. They're saying, God, I'm going to be in tune. On a global scale, 84% of the population of the world is connected to one religion or the other. What does that tell me? It affirms these words in Acts chapter 17, talking about God has made us and he gives us our breath and everything, just like we sang about this morning, that he's the breath in our lungs. God did this, move people around in different ways. So why? What was his motive? God did this so that men would seek him and perhaps reach out to him and find him, though he's not far from any of us. Solomon told us in Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and verse 11 that God also has set eternity in the hearts of men. That's why 90% of people believe in the higher power, because he's engineered our spiritual DNA to say there's something else than this. I mean, there's got to be something else more than this. He set an eternity in our hearts, yet they cannot fathom what God has done from the beginning. See, this is our whole campaign that we call Who? Who is God put in our boat? You see, the mission was Nineveh. And sometimes we can hide behind the big mission. And while in our little teeny boats, our community, our neighborhoods, the places we work, there are people right there that are starving for God because God has engineered them to be hungry for him. And God is counting on people who will say yes, so we can be in tune with the spiritual needs of those in our boat and say, there is a God. And he's a true God. And he loves us so much with so much compassion that he gave his own boy, his own son, to come for us because we're broken, to put his son on a cross that we might have access to God. Being imperfect, we can be perfect. We can be, as we sang earlier, the righteousness of God, that we as broken human beings can stand before the living God because our King came back from the dead and infuses new life, and you can have a vibrant relationship with God. God is looking for that messenger in your boat. That's what we need. It does impact the people around us. I'm sure you might have heard this story because sometimes kids don't want to go to church, right? And you heard about the mom who, it's Sunday morning, went in and woke her son up and said, it's time to go to church and we're running late. And he says, no, I'm not going today. And she goes, you got to go. Come on. And, Jay went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And, now it's 45 minutes out. And he's like, you got to get up. She's talking to her son. You got to give up and go to church. And he goes, I'm not going to church. She says, you got to go to church. You're the pastor. It would impact other people. Our no sometimes impacts other people. Here's a final thing, and it might be surprising to you, because when we ask the question, hey, what if we say no to God? You might think, well, Nineveh loses, because that's where God had asked him to go, desperately in need of God. We looked at it last week, a city full of violence, full of immorality, full of brokenness. And they didn't even know the right hand from the left. They didn't even know how deeply entrenched they were away from God. So what happens to Nineveh if we say no? Because your first thought might be like, I guess they don't get reached. Think again. God has a way about him that he wants us to participate and partner in his mission. But God will find someone. You are important to God's mission. But if you say no, God will find someone. Watch this. You remember Esther? She had a shot at saving her people, the Jews, the Israelites. And God came to her and said, hey, you can say yes or no, but here's the deal. If you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews, because they were getting ready to be annihilated, relief and deliverance for the Jews, it will arise from another place. But you and your father's family, you're going to perish. And who knows, Esther? But you may have come to this royal position for such a time as this. And if you'd love to participate in the mission, man, it'd be awesome. You see, because God, the winds of compassion, said, not only do I want you to be stable, I don't want you to be tossed to and fro. Those winds of compassion, they come back. Not just because we have peace in our life, but because we can have purpose in our life by being on mission with God. God's mission is going to get done, and he wants us to play a role in it. But trust me, there are too many persecuted countries that we're in, that there are plenty of people that are saying no, and God's saying, well, then I'll pick that guy to go. I will watch. The more the church of Christ is persecuted and oppressed around the world, the more it grows. The most vibrant places in the world where the church is not asleep, is not lukewarm, are places in the world where they say, you can't do it. And God says, oh, no, you didn't. You remember Elijah? He was having a boo-hoo session in a cave. And he says, I'm the onlyest one like Tigger. He said, I've been very zealous in 1 Kings 19. I've been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, broken down your altars and your prophets to death with the sword. And I'm the only one left. This whole mission rests on big me. I'm the only one left. And now they're trying to kill me too. The Lord said, hey, a little wake-up call here for you. Go back to where you came. We're going to pick your substitution. He's going to get in the game now. His name is Elisha, to succeed you as prophet. And I just want you to know, I have reserved 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal, and all whose mouths have not kissed him. See, here's the thing. We are most fulfilled when we go to Nineveh. Whether we like it, whether we don't like it, whether we think it's a good idea, what makes sense to us, doesn't matter. Because God is asking us to be on mission. Wherever you live, wherever you work, wherever you play. You might find yourself today in an unstable place. The seas are at least enough to make you a little seasick. Maybe you're trying to figure out, what is it in my life that it's like this? And it might be that you haven't paused enough to take inventory of what's causing the pain. I heard a story about this guy who went to the doctor, and he went to the doctor and said, everywhere I touch, it hurts. I touch here, oh, it hurts. I touch here, oh, it hurts. I touch right here, oh, it hurts. Up here, oh, it hurts. The doctor said, fool, your finger's broken. See, sometimes we think it's like we can't quite figure it out. Sometimes it's just right there. It might be that it's because we're saying no to God. So I have to ask you, and we'll pray. Are you in yes mode right now? Or are you in no mode? It makes a difference to you internally. It makes a difference to the people in the boat. And it makes a difference in your purpose or are you going to be on mission with God?